Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's webcast. Before we begin, we're going to do just a quick audio test. I'm going to ask the early attendees to use the chat box and send a message to host if you have any problems hearing our presenters speak. David, would you please introduce yourself?
Hello, this is David Altman. I'm with CCL.
Great. Michelle?
Hi, Michelle Bryan here with Center for Creative Leadership.
Perfect. Great. I can hear both of you very well. I'm going to monitor the chat box for any issues our attendees might be having, and we'll begin in just a few moments. Please take a moment to look at the chat area in the lower right corner of your screen. If your chat module is not open, you can select the chat icon. It's located at the very bottom center of your screen. In the chat module, you'll see a drop-down menu with options next to the word To. If you have any technical problems today, please send a private chat message to host. If you have questions for the presenter, please send those to all panelists. And if you have questions or comments you just want to share with the entire audience, send a chat to everyone. We will send all registrants an email tomorrow with a link to the recording. And now I'll turn the microphone over to Michelle.
Hi, welcome to the Center for Creative Leadership webinar, How Leaders in Leadership Collectives Can Increase Psychological Safety at Work. My name is Michelle Bryan. I will be your webinar moderator for today's session. If you're not familiar with us, CCL is a top-ranked global provider of leadership development. Our cutting-edge solutions are steeped in extensive research, and we work with hundreds of thousands of leaders at all levels. So we thank you so much for joining this webinar today to learn how to promote psychological safety at work. We are very happy to have CCL's Chief Operating Officer, David Altman, here with us today. So welcome, Dave. Thank you for being with us. I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Michelle, and welcome to everybody. We have extensive collective intelligence online today. We're going to have over 400 people from across the globe. So while we're too large a number to use breakout sessions, our goal is to tap into this collective reservoir of experiences so that we leave our hour together with new insights, hopefully new commitments about how we're going to show up with other people. It's going to be hard for me to track the chat while I'm speaking, but chat will be a great mechanism for you to share resources, advice with other people. So make sure you have the chat open. I will, of course, be presenting some content on psychological safety and sharing some of my own stories, including some mishaps. But our hour together is not going to be me talking at you the entire time. You're going to be asked to share some of your experiences using the chat function. We've included 2 polls. We have included a few minutes for you to engage in individual reflection, and also at the end to set some new goals about promoting psychological safety in your workplace, at home, in your community. CCL is an organization committed to putting ideas into action. As you'll see in a moment, our mission compels us to make the world a better place by helping leaders and leadership collectives become more effective. And Michelle, if you could put in the Lewin quote in the chat. So earlier this week, as I was reflecting on the mission of CCL, a quote from the renowned scholar and practitioner Kurt Lewin crossed my mind. And in a moment, well, it's in there now, you'll see it. He said, if you want to truly understand something, try to change it. So let's keep that advice in mind as we spend the next hour together. if we want to truly understand psychological safety, we need to try to change it and then keenly observe what is happening to us and our colleagues as safety goes up and down. So this is briefly CCL's mission. As I said before, this is around generating knowledge around leadership and leadership development, and then putting it into use for the benefit of society worldwide. And we touch many thousands of lives each year. We're all over the globe. We have nearly 1 million alumni. And so this is part of our purpose. We want to create leaders and leadership collectives who make a difference in the world. So here's what we're hoping that you will get out of our time together today. Understand more about psychological safety and how it produces a variety of positive outcomes. Talk a little bit about strategies and tactics that you can use to promote interpersonal risk-taking. Interpersonal risk-taking is, as we'll note in a few minutes, at the heart of psychological safety. And then how to leverage challenging other people and supporting other people to improve team and individual performance. So here's some imagery about being connected and being disconnected. And at the heart of psychological safety, which represents this image quite directly, is connection between people. So we're going to start off with a reflection. So what we'd like you to do is think about a time in which you experienced consistent and powerful connections in a team or in some sort of collective. And then also think about a time when you experienced consistent and discouraging disconnections in a team. And then I'm going to give you like about 45 seconds to reflect on that. And then type into chat just one lesson that you learned or one issue that you're thinking about now when you think about connections or disconnections. So I'm going to be quiet just for about 30 seconds now. Yeah, some really great stuff. Vulnerability, one team. It's the chats are coming in so quickly I can hardly keep track of them, but nice. So as we go through the presentation today, keep these highlights and lowlights in mind as we dwell deeper into psychological safety. Okay, let's go on. You can keep putting chat reflections in. So what you see here are a list of items. This comes from the work of Amy Edmondson at Harvard Business School. She's one person I'm going to recommend you look into. And what you see here are 7 items. This is a scale of psychological safety that she initially developed for her dissertation or PhD dissertation. I've changed the wording a little bit so they all go in the same direction. So in a moment, there's going to be a poll that pops up, and I want you just to select the one item with which you most strongly disagree about a team that you're on right now. So the one item where you most strongly disagree with respect to a team that you're on right now. And this is going to take a good minute for us to compile the results. Okay, so just click on one of those boxes. You need to scroll down in the poll questions to get to, you may need to get to F and G. And then once we have your responses, we'll get to look at the results in real time together. So instead of, you can put your comments in chat, great, but click on one of those little circles on the left of the letter from A to G. And I'm just going to mute for about 30 seconds, and pretty soon we'll see the results. So click on one of those circular boxes. Yeah, there was a question. If none of them, that's fine. You have a psychologically safe team, so kudos. Okay, so let's see. In a moment, we're going to see what the results are. And we're up to over 500 people here, so great to have all of you with us. Because of the number of people that are here and the time it takes to compile these results, just give our team a little bit more time. Okay, so what we see here is a pretty even distribution. The one that was most common is B, item B, selected by 20%. Members of this team are able to bring up problems and tough issues, right? And this is an issue with many teams. When times are going well, people feel safe to bring issues up, but when it's tough stuff, perhaps even when it's failure, and we'll talk about failure, then it's a bit tougher. So these are 7 items that represent psychological safety, only one of a number of ways to measure it. And you can use this on your team, or even just put these items out when you're in a team meeting and have a discussion about it. Okay, thanks for participating. All right, so I want to share a story about psychological safety that I experienced in the last couple of weeks. So this is going to take me about 5 minutes. Like many of you, CCL is deeply involved in issues around leadership related to equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I'll call that EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And those issues are clearly front and center in the US and in other parts of the world. So knowing that we have people here from outside the US, EDI plays out in different ways, in different contexts, but it's in play everywhere. So every day, we have organizations coming to CCL asking for assistance in helping leaders and leadership teams do a better job elevating equity, activating diversity, and leading inclusively. And beyond helping clients, we're actually doing the hard work of EDI within CCL. And that's what I want to talk about. And I want to connect it to psychological safety. And it's a personal story. As a white person with privilege of all kinds, including positional power at CCL, I've come to understand and embrace the need to leverage my privilege in new ways in service of the CCL mission, my colleagues at CCL, and our clients. It almost goes without saying that any progress we make on EDI at CCL cannot be accomplished without high levels of psychological safety. Think about it. Frank discussions about EDI require that all people feel psychologically safe to take interpersonal risks, to share their stories and experiences, some of which are painful. And people need to believe that what they say will not be used against them. They need to be able to speak truth to power. So last week, I finished a month-long capability development session at CCL that was designed to help us design and deliver EDI and leadership work. And we were assisted by great colleagues at NTL, formerly the National Training Lab. And I was the highest ranking CCLer involved. Early in this program, I said something to my 20 colleagues on a Zoom call that was an important learning moment for me. It was a misstep, one of several missteps that I made during the past month. I wanted to let my colleagues know that despite my privilege and positional power at CCL, I wanted them to speak their truths to me, to speak truth to power. I wanted to hear their stories so that I could be a more effective leader at CCL. And my intent was laudable. Thus, I felt good about making that statement, speak truth to power. And then there was silence. And one of my male colleagues, a person of color, said, when white men with power and privilege speak truth to other powerful white men of privilege at CCL, people of color lower in the organization will feel safer to do the same. And that statement became a signature moment in our group's movement toward increasing psychological safety. And by the end of our month together, which, as I said, ended a few days ago, we were having brutally honest conversations with each other. We were all able to take more interpersonal risks with each other compared to the month before. And during this month, I also received feedback on a few statements that I made that were perceived by some to be microaggressions. Again, my intent was different than the impact my statements had on others, but when I received the feedback in the moment and later through emails and conversations, all within a container of psychological safety, I internalized the feedback and in so doing am on my way to becoming a better person and a better CCL leader. Now, during the month that we spent together, I heard stories that I had not heard in my 16 years at CCL because many of my colleagues of color did not feel safe telling those stories. My colleagues' recent willingness to tell those stories was a result of some courageous people believing that together we could build an even stronger foundation of psychological safety. And this has led me in the last 2 weeks, including today, before I came here, to show up differently in the executive team meetings that I serve on, in conversations I'm having with senior colleagues at CCL, in proposals I'm making about how CCL can be stronger in the EDI space. And it has led me in this moment to be vulnerable with all of you by sharing this story. Now, the story I just told happened during a period when U.S. Congressman John Lewis passed away. And John Lewis, as many of you may have seen, sent out a tweet which in a way is a rallying cry for our EDI work and for work on psychological safety, and I offer it here for you. Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful. Be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It's a struggle of a lifetime. Never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. And as we pursue building more psychologically safe organizations, some necessary trouble will need to be made. And that's what we're going to talk about some more. Now, I want to refer you to a book that just came out by Timothy Clark. You can maybe see at the bottom the title, but you'll get this deck in the next day or so. But it's called The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety. And Dr. Clark is the founder and CEO of an organization called Leader Factor. And what I like about this book, and I'm not going to read all this material here because you can look it up. He's got some good YouTube videos. He connects psychological safety to issues around inclusion and diversity. And so here, I think it's important that if you're interested in the story that I told, and perhaps you're facing similar issues, take a look at that book. I think it's a good read. Now, we're going to draw from the amazing work of Amy Edmondson at Harvard Business School. I mentioned her name. That survey that you responded to comes from her. And this is one of my favorite all-time books, published a year ago, called The Fearless Organization. We were hoping to show you a 3-minute video of her speaking, but with so many people on, it's just, we don't have the bandwidth. So you can look her up on YouTube. We'll send you a link to that, and it's in the chat right now, so copy it and pay attention to her work. If you don't have time to read the book or you don't have money to spend on a book, there's plenty of online resources. So let's talk about what psychological safety is. It's a belief, a shared belief by people in a team or an organization that it's safe for interpersonal risk-taking. It's safe for interpersonal risk-taking. It's a sense of confidence that your teammates will not embarrass, reject, or punish someone for speaking their mind, for bringing candor to the conversation, for bringing all that they have as a human into the organization. So it's around the climate, the third bullet point, where you have interpersonal trust, you have mutual respect, people are comfortable with themselves, Doesn't mean that everybody's nice all the time. It means that you embrace the conflict and you know that you have their backs and they have your backs. So why should we even be talking about it? Well, if you read the research, and there's plenty of it, a growing number of articles and studies on psychological safety, many good things happen. People speak their mind. You know, we spend so much time thinking about how do we hire smart, motivated people? And we need to continue doing that. But once you get smart, motivated people, if they don't feel comfortable sharing what they know and what they don't know, if those smart, motivated people don't share concerns, are afraid of sharing mistakes they made, hold back on asking challenging questions, hold back even further presenting half-baked ideas that they're thinking about. If they don't feel safe in doing that, then you've just wasted your time and energy bringing people into your organization who have a lot of talent. So at the end of the day, this is around unleashing talent. It supports having healthy conflict. It mitigates failure. How does it mitigate failure? Well, when people feel comfortable talking about things that aren't working right, knowing that they won't be thrown under the bus, well, then you prevent big failures from happening, and actually you create the opportunity to harvest lessons learned from failures experienced. It increases operational excellence. It promotes creativity and innovation. How does it do it? Well, people throw out their half-baked ideas, as I said before. They push the envelope because people won't say, you're crazy, you're unrealistic, that's not going to work. Why did we even bring you on this team? Those kinds of thoughts or statements would reflect low psychological safety. Well, here's low psychological safety. People are on teams where there's fear, mistrust, apprehension, concern, guardedness. I would venture a guess that nearly all of the 575 people here right now have been on a team at some point or have been in an organization where they have felt at least one of these feelings. So psychological safety is something that you really got to work on. What it's not about being nice. It's not part of your personality. It's different, though connected to trust. And it's not about setting the bar so low that everybody's just feeling comfortable. No, this is around laying it all on the line and people being all in. It's about building a climate, a culture where you're brutally honest, where you bring your full selves to work. So let's do another poll. Here's the question. It's a simple question. Click one of those circles, A, B, C, D, E, in your poll questions. My opinion counts at work. So if you strongly disagree, click on the A, you disagree, B, etc. My opinion counts at work. We're going to give you roughly about another minute to answer that question. So a common question that Dr. Edmondson talks about is, can you have too much psychological safety? Like, is too much interpersonal risk-taking a bad thing? And the basic response is no. Because when you reduce interpersonal fear, it makes it easier to ask a question, to admit an error. It doesn't guarantee that you have the right people in your organization. It does not mean that you have the right strategy. It doesn't mean that you're operationally excellent. It doesn't mean that you're going to be successful. What it does mean is the people that you have and the expectations that people have of the organization, it's out there for everyone to see and hear. So what we have here is rounding up. We have about 70%, 71% who agree that their opinion counts at work. And we have about 30% who aren't sure or who disagree. Now, when researchers like Amy Edmondson and others ask this question in representative samples, and I'll just tell you right away, this is an unusual group. Remember, 70% of you agree, and the data show, there's a Gallup poll, only 3 out of 10 employees agree. So what we have here is a little, basically a flip of what the data show in large representative populations. So when you do a survey, only 3 in 10 agree that their opinions count at work. I think I happened to see a question pop in about what about people of color. I'm not sure about that, but based on the story that I told, I think many organizations struggle with issues of diversity, inclusion, and equity. And in the absence of psychological safety and lower levels of inclusion, these numbers would probably be worse. Okay, so this begs the question now. So if psychological safety, it's not an individual attribute, it represents climate, culture, what can you do as a leader, but also as a member of a team to lead a psychologically safe team? And I just saw another chat pop up. I'm not supposed to be looking at it, but a really good point from Eric. Gallup says strongly agree. Yes, I stand corrected on that. Thank you, Eric. Appreciate that. Okay, back to the slide. Leading a psychologically safe team. So set expectations as a leader or team member about factors that we know contribute to psych safety. So what do you do with failure? What are the expectations when something's not working right? What about bad news? How are you going to handle that as a team? And it's one thing to say the words, but when failure or bad news is conveyed, how do you actually deal with it behaviorally? What are the norms for managing conflict? How do you promote, as a team member or team leader, dialogue, deep dialogue, and debate? And the AI is appreciative inquiry, not artificial intelligence. How do you use both challenge and support? Too much challenge or too much support doesn't lead to good team dynamics. What about frank talk? How do we promote candor? What are the expectations that we have among our teammates? What about new ideas? Are we willing to accept wild and crazy ideas that are not well formulated, or do we want ideas only that have been thought through, tested, iterated, etc.? Do we listen deeply to understand with empathy, or do we talk more than we listen? Do we ask powerful, open-ended questions, or do we ask gotcha questions? These types of tactics contribute to the climate of psychological safety. What about learning and improvement? To cite Carol Dweck at Stanford, do we believe that we are put on this earth, we're built as humans to learn and grow? Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Or do we have more of a fixed mindset? Nothing ventured, nothing lost. Like if I don't ask a tough question or I don't put myself on the line, nothing ventured, then nothing lost. No one's going to throw me under the bus. I can just fly under the radar. Another thing to do to create psychological safety is connect the work, even if it's mundane, to the higher purpose, to the mission, to the vision of the organization. How about paying it forward? The research here is called generalized reciprocity. You can look that up, generalized reciprocity. So a norm for asking and then giving help when asked. That contributes to psychological safety. Expressing gratitude and disappointment. And TKTH is totally kind, totally honest. Again, that speaks to the importance of candor. And do we embrace the expertise among many, or do we have this hero expert mentality? So these are just some ideas to stimulate your thinking about what you can do, even if you don't lead a team or lead an organization, to contribute in even small ways to the way that teams operate. So, at the risk of creating a hurricane of comments with 580 people. How does psychological safety affect your work life? Your work life. Put that in the chat. So you doubt your abilities. Positive side minimizes anxiety, distraction, lack of confidence. You can bring your whole self to work. So we got both positive and negative. Feel like a failure. You're more cautious. You're more nervous. You have energy. You don't have energy. You have self-confidence. You don't have self-confidence. You bring your best self to work or not. You're not, someone said, I'm not allowed to share my opinions unless they're positive. That doesn't create psychological safety, right? So these are really great comments. So when you go back to your organization and back to your team, self-monitor the feelings and thoughts that you have through the lens of psychological safety, and then think about what you might be able to do in small or large ways to promote a different climate in your organization. You're going to get all these slides, so you'll be able to go back to these and think more about it. Appreciate everyone jumping in on the chat. Okay, so now, quiet time. Once you identify 3 actions that you think might increase psychological safety on a team that's important to you. We're not asking you really to share those 3, but this is your time to just reflect, think, and I'll stop talking in a moment, something none of us have enough time. What can you do actually to increase safety? All right, I'm going to give you about a minute to do this, and I'll be on mute. Okay, that was about a minute plus when I was talking. So you remember when we first started and I talked about CCL and our vision and mission, it is ideas into action. So what we really want to end with today, and we're not at the end point, but we want you to go away from our time together here with some concrete actions, some tactics, and a commitment that you're making to yourself to put some of these ideas in action. This is not just about spending an hour listening to someone talk, oh, that was interesting, and then you go back to your normal life and you don't do anything with it. So do something with it, even if it's to cite BJ Fogg, Tiny Habit, to cite Teresa Mobley at Harvard, who wrote a book called The Progress Principle, small wins, small actions. That's how you create transformation. It's by taking small steps. So you're all committing, I know, to take some small steps. Okay, so now I do want you, and you're already doing it, so share an insight that you had from your reflection. And some of you have done that already. I wasn't able to pay too much attention to it. So just share. This is where we're going to share with each other reflections that might help, some insights that you've had might help somebody else. So the leader sets the tone. Thank you, Susan. That's true. Leaders play a big role in setting psychological safety, but it's not solely the responsibility of a leader. We all need to step up. And leadership is a shared enterprise. It's not, unless you're in a very hierarchical organization, it's not just one person. Listen intently and ask clean questions. Thank you, Michael. Ask more questions than make statements. Thank you, Jen. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we listen twice as much as we speak. Listen to understand. Ask the team what they would like to see to increase psychological safety. Right. Thank you, Travis. Sam, admit limitations. Yeah, expressing vulnerability. Having the courage to do so. We're going to talk about that in a couple of minutes. Megan talks about lip service. Don't just say it, but people observe everything you do and everything you say with a lot of intent, especially if you're in a leadership position. So, the words matter and the behaviors matter even more. Alana, by forgiving of mistakes. Yes, thank you. If we can create a norm where people admit mistakes, and then forgiving is one thing, super important, and then learning from the mistakes, not just the person who made it, but the team. Okay, we are going to harvest, we could write a leadership book on psychological safety just from the chats. So I really appreciate you all jumping in. Khalil, thank you for your point about actively listening. All right, keep it going, and we'll move on to the next. All right, so here's a skydiving team. Why might courage be important for building psychological safety in a team? So this was intended to be a reflection, but you guys are so active on chat, they're flying in. Yeah, it takes courage to be vulnerable, candid feedback. Being vulnerable yourself will be reflected in your team. Helps to develop trust. Takes courage to build trust. Right. So I want to share just a little bit from Brene Brown. Some of you, I'm sure, know her work, and I want to try to make a little connection here just to stimulate your thoughts to psychological safety. So if Brene Brown were here and we were to ask her what she believes courage is, she might link courage to vulnerability. So to be courageous means to be vulnerable. So if you haven't thought much about that, you might think, those seem to be opposite things. Actually, and there's the line, we may associate vulnerability with feeling weak or incapable, but that's misguided. Being vulnerable is the most accurate measure of courage. I'll have to say the story that I shared at the beginning of this, I thought a little bit about sharing it, but for me to be a legitimate speaker on psychological safety, I had to show a little bit of courage by being vulnerable and talking about mistakes that I made. And so I decided to do so. It's impossible to have one without the other. You can't be courageous without being vulnerable. They really are one and the same, two sides of the coin. And so what happens in a team that lacks the psychological safety that allow members to be courageously vulnerable? And I'll tell you what, I've been on a number of teams, and I've facilitated team activities, team retreats, where there wasn't courage and there wasn't vulnerability. And you end up perhaps helping the team at some level, but you don't go deep. And just, I think if we have time, I'll share another story that happened to me a couple months ago. I was in the Middle East working with a senior team. This is a really successful senior team. It was one of these unicorns, tech unicorns, and they went from nothing to a multi-billion-dollar company in a pretty short period of time. And we were working with the team, and everybody was nice, and they were incredibly smart and the usual things that you would expect. And then we decided to, because we just felt like they were holding back. And so we got the founder and the co-founder sitting knee to knee on two chairs, surrounded in a circle by the rest of the executive team. And for about 90 minutes, they had this brutally honest conversation with each other. And then we started adding a chair. So we separated them a little bit. We added one chair and then another chair. And we asked executive team members to join the conversation. No one would at the beginning because it wasn't psychologically safe. And then I sat in there and I asked a powerful question, open-ended question, and that broke the ice. And fast forward, after about 3 hours, the whole executive team was in a circle having the conversation that they needed to have for literally years. But we had to break the ice. And it was around courage and vulnerability and candor. I mean, basically in the moment, they made a pretty significant move toward being psychologically safe. So let's reflect for a moment on Maya Angelou. And this goes back to what I spoke about before. Let me let you read the quote. Do the best you can until you know better. And when you know better, do better. And this know better, do better, know better, do better cycle is one that I really relate to. And it goes back to what I said before. Tiny habits, small wins, incremental changes. I may not have the figure exactly right, but most of you would agree that you could make a 1% improvement in some goal that you have each day. 1%, that's all. So, and this is something you could try out with your colleagues. Are you willing to sign up for 1% a day? And if you do that and it's compounded, then at the end of the year, you're like 30 times better than you were at the beginning of the year. So when we start thinking about the enormity of changing an organizational or team climate, especially if you're in a psychologically unsafe team, do the best you can until you know better. And when you know better, do better. 1%, day in and day out. Ask a powerful question. Just one question. Listen a little bit more intently. Share just a small failure. Express a little bit more candor than you've done in the past, etc. And when you do that, taking risks, supporting others, challenging, doing the things that we talked about before, you actually might begin to shift in small ways the climate of the team or the organization. There was a question earlier that I wanted to get to now, which is around trust versus psychological safety. And this comes up a lot, and Edmondson, I think, talks about it in an interesting way. So I've said multiple times now, psychological safety, it's not a personality characteristic. It's not something in the individual's head. It reflects a group level variable. It's the climate. It's the perceptions that people have of climate or culture. So that's psychological safety, group level. Trust refers more to interactions between people, between two people. So psychological safety is more focused on a group norm, and trust is more focused on a belief one person has about another person. Now, of course, if you have a group norm that is promotes high levels of psychological safety, by definition, there's going to be trust between members of the team. So I'll leave you with one other thing. It's not my idea. I think it also comes from Edmondson. So trust is, and maybe Michelle, you can write this down, or you guys can look this up from Professor Google. But trust is, will you give others the benefit of the doubt when you take a risk? Trust is will you give others the benefit of the doubt when you take a risk? And psychological safety is, will others give you the benefit of the doubt when you take a risk, or you ask for help, or you admit a mistake? So Michelle, psychological safety is, will others give you the benefit of the doubt when you take a risk, or you ask for help, or you admit a mistake? And that basically says, is the environment safe for you to take risks, to take interpersonal risks? So that's a quick summary of trust versus psychological safety. I wanted to return to one point that I just glossed over, and someone mentioned it actually. Is psychological safety basically the responsibility of a boss, a leader, a supervisor? And the answer is yes and no. Yes, of course, bosses and leaders play a role in shaping climate and culture. But we all, even if you're not a boss, supervisor, leader, we all contribute to climate. How do we do that? Well, we ask good questions, we convey curiosity, we express interest, we listen deeply, we put questions out there. I don't know, or I need help, or I'm sorry, or I made a mistake, or what can I do to help, or what are your concerns? That's a powerful question. So by asking these questions, by showing a little courage and vulnerability, by engaging in curiosity, by listening deeply, etc., that's how we need to show up every day. And those types of actions, the words and behaviors that we engage in, regardless of the level that we're at, that contributes to the climate and the culture. In fact, an overly simplistic way to describe culture or culture is the way we do things around here, the way we do things around here. So we all have a role to play in how we do things around here, in our team, in our organization. And you can start that today. So how about this? At the end of this call, and before the end of your day or your evening, because we have people over in Europe and Asia, send an SMS, send a WhatsApp, send an email, make a phone call, do something, even if it's small, to make a deposit in the psychological safety of a team or an organization that you're a part of. Just start now and do it and see what happens. And it shouldn't be taking the ultimate risk that you've ever taken in your career. It's just a small step to get used to it, a tiny habit. Okay, so before we open it up for questions, and this question, final reflection, speaks to what I just talked about. What do you need to stop, start, or continue today, tomorrow, and over the next 2 weeks that will contribute to or get out or stop contributing to the lack of psychological safety? What are you willing to say or do differently or do more of, or continue doing if you're already doing it? So what we'd like you to do is when you're chatting, open it up to select everyone in the chat so that everyone can see it. So Natalie, thank you. Give more feedback. Yeah. And that feedback is make it behaviorally based, what you actually observed and the impact that their behaviors, what they said or did, had on you. Stop allowing others to interrupt my thoughts before I'm finished. Okay? Listen more deeply. Leave the ego behind. Be courageous, not just to others, but to myself. Smile in meetings. Nice. Consider feedback as a gift. Yeah. Sometimes it's like chocolate at Valentine's. It's got an arrow through it, but still chocolate, so accept it. Be more patient regarding progress being made. Stop judging. Own the missteps and own the successes. Right. Welcome dissenters. Thank you. That's great. Be vulnerable so that others will too. Stop trusting anybody and everybody. Well, trust has to be earned, right? Might I suggest that you look at the work of Timothy Clark, Amy Edmondson, and there are others who have some great material on psychological safety. Active listening with compassion. Listen more, stop interrupting, continue asking questions. Yep, assume positive intent. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so we have roughly about 10 minutes left. Now I can stop trying to talk to the slides and see if I can handle some questions. Michelle, you've been paying attention to
Yeah, we've got some great questions coming in. If you do have a question, just put it in chat. We'll do our best to get to it.
Thank you, Michelle. There's one thing I want to respond to. Jonathan Vihar, my colleague and friend, thank you. Yeah, so the question was about the story that I told and what my colleague said. So he said, my colleague said, when white men with power and privilege, and I'm in that category, when white men with power and privilege speak truth to other powerful white men of privilege at the Center for Creative Leadership, people of color lower in the organization will feel safer to do the same. So basically what he was saying to me is like, well, you're asking me to be vulnerable, to expose some of the experiences that I've had, which are not always positive, and yet you're not speaking up to other people like you with high level, big titles and privilege. So you show a little courage. You show a little vulnerability. You speak your truths to other people and challenge power and authority. And when we see you doing that, okay, we're going to feel more comfortable that you're the real deal, and we'll speak up. And so I did. And it was incredible. It didn't happen right away. And, I felt shame and embarrassment, frankly, when he first happened, because, in retrospect, it's like, yeah, obviously I blew it there. But at the end of the month, I was so empowered, and so was he and other people. So we had to model it. And, I will forever admire this guy for having the courage to share something with the COO of CCL on day one of our time together.
Great, thank you.
Sorry to interrupt, Michelle.
No, that's good. That's good. There were actually a couple of comments with that, so I'm glad you went back to it. Next question I have coming through is, how important is psychological safety in the new virtual world we're living in, and are remote situations different with this?
Yeah, so I think what I notice just personally, how it plays out is, you're staring at a screen all day long. The good thing is if you're paying attention and not trying to do your email while you're in a meeting, you're really paying attention. Your ability to empathize, to apply your emotional intelligence, I found can be enhanced because you are looking intently at people and not just listening to the words, but also paying attention to the emotion. And, if you're face to face and you're staring at somebody for 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, that can be quite awkward in many cultures. But on Zoom or on WebEx, whatever, no one knows who you're looking at. So it's an opportunity to leverage listening to understand. Also with the chat, as we're doing here, you can engage in psychologically safe behaviors if you think it through. Some people send darts with chats and arrows and worse, but it's also an opportunity to ask a powerful question. Maybe some of you feel safer to be a little more vulnerable by typing your vulnerability, where you can spend a little time thinking through how you want to convey it. So, there's limitations to the virtual world that we're in, but I like to think about what can we do more effectively? And if we have some things that we can do, let's leverage that. Let's focus on making a difficult situation better.
Great. Do you have any recommendations around addressing leaders who do not create psychological safety within their teams?
Yeah, so recruit allies. In some cases, there's toxic leaders and toxic cultures, and the risk of being vulnerable and doing some of the things here could be quite significant. And know that in most cases, others feel the same way, and in fact, some leaders feel that same way, and if supported or poked and prodded in very nice ways, might be willing to engage in safe, psychologically safe behaviors. So I think it's important to not jump in with both feet. So just to take the pool analogy, you got to stick your toes in the pool and get used to it. So take small steps, find allies among leadership teams if that's where you think you want to intervene, and see what happens there. And frankly, at CCL we teach this stuff. We have a pretty psychologically safe environment, but we can do better. And the story that I told you now twice, that actually has caused me to step up in ways that I didn't before, and I believe it's having a positive effect. So don't go at it alone.
Great. How do you create psychological safety and hold others to account?
Well, we talked a bit about, and there's a slide in here that you'll get in the next day or two about what you can do to create psychological safety. So I don't want to repeat that too much, but pay attention to the symptoms of psychological safety. One is silence. So if you see people who are being silent, who seem to have a fear of speaking up, that's telling you that it's not psychologically safe. And so are there ways that you can help them express themselves, even in small ways, to break the ice a little bit? Fear, having fear in an organization interferes, and there's neuroscience on this, with effective thought. It interferes with learning. It interferes with cooperation. So if you're in a team where you think learning is not happening, where people aren't cooperating, where there's silence, where people, when a meeting ends, they're just so grateful to get out of there, that's a sign that you've got a problem. And so helping people bring their full selves to work so that they unleash their full potential, their full talent, that should be the goal.
Great. How will psychological? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to reinforce Linda Rozek-Burton wrote a thing about teaching gratitude to improve psychological safety. That's super important. And so just expressing gratitude to somebody can be an intervention, right? And it's safe to do that. It reinforces somebody's sense of self. Perhaps you thank them for speaking up, or thank them for the great question that they asked, etc. So that then feeds or reduces the risks that people might feel in engaging in certain interpersonal behaviors. The last thing I'll say on that, Michelle, one last thing is mistakes is the big issue. So how a team or an organization handles mistakes will tell you a lot about the level of psychological safety. Are mistakes seen as opportunities to learn and grow? Are mistakes used to engage in, after action reviews or assessments of what happened? Is it used as fuel to improve processes, or is it used to punish people, to prevent people from advancing in the organization, to shame them, etc.? Now, people who make the same mistake over and over, that's a performance issue. That's not a psychological safety issue. But how organizations, what's the culture around failure? That, among all the things I've talked about, is a key thing to pay attention to. And if you see people shamed or thrown under the bus or humiliated or whatever around failure, maybe think about what small steps you can take to promote a different orientation. All right, we have about a minute and a half left. Michelle,
there's a couple around the same topic. So any good tips for the nice and friendly team that is very generous with gratitude and helpfulness, but doesn't actually get at the tough stuff? And we have another, one where is there a good virtual way to do an exercise to create like psychological safety with a group?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So as I said up front, psychological safety doesn't mean everybody's nice and you come out of a meeting and no one is damaged. No, I mean, that's not what we're talking about here. So I think one starting point would be powerful questions, challenging questions, questions that can't be answered with, oh, what a great question, and then a superficial answer is given. So I think, if you're concerned, if you don't have a culture of embracing conflict in service of a higher purpose, getting people to ask each other really powerful questions, and then to have the ability to listen deeply to understand, that could be one technique that could make a nice team remain nice, but go deeper on the nice. And as you go deeper and deeper, you actually will uncover issues that aren't quite working right. All right, so Michelle, I think we're, with respect to everybody's busy schedules, I want to thank everybody for being here today. We had almost 600 people, and I learned some great things in the chat, and I appreciate that, and I hope you'll put this stuff to good use.
Yeah, and thank you, David, for sharing those ideas that promoting psychological safety at work to foster that trust, creativity, collaboration, and innovation across the organization. So tomorrow, everyone who is registered for this webinar will receive a follow-up email with links to the recording, as well as the slide deck and relevant articles related to psychological safety. So as you exit the webinar, we hope you take a moment to complete the evaluation so we can continue to make these webinars well worth your time. So thank you very much, David, again, appreciate it, and we look forward to your attendance at a future webinar.
All right. Thank you, everyone. This actually concludes today's webcast. Thank you all for attending.